Well, welcome to Tying Michigan's Best Trout Flies. We're going to talk a little bit today about Michigan's famous hex hatch and a particular part of the hex hatch that's oftentimes ignored because mostly it's a nighttime event, or at least that's what most people think. But I'll just give you an example of it. Last year I was fishing on the Manistee in the daytime. I'm fishing, I'm wading upstream, and there was a gentleman up ahead of me. And he saw me coming. He went over to the bank and he sat down. Well, I got up to him. He had sat down on his dock. He owned a piece of property there. It was his dock. And so naturally we stopped. We talked about fishing. And we were talking about this particular stretch of the river. And he was telling me about what a great hex hatch this particular piece of the river gets at night. And I said, yeah, I'm well familiar with it. I fished here many, many times. And I asked him, I said, do you ever get out and fish the hex hatch during the day? And he gave me a blank stare. He said, well, what do you mean in the day? I said, well, almost all these rivers that have hex have daytime hatching. You can catch large fish in the daytime on dry flies during the hex hatch, and brown drakes as well for that matter. A lot of folks evidently aren't aware of that. I just wanted to use this time in this video to make people aware that you can catch good fish during the daytime in a hex hatch, especially under the right weather conditions. When you get cloudy, cool, rainy days or muggy days and it's clouds and a lot of moisture in the air. Hexes hatch sometimes very heavily on the rivers in northern Michigan right in the middle of the day, and they're very susceptible to good-sized dry flies in the midday. In fact, cool weather really doesn't put them off. Once that hatch gets going, I've heard a lot about water temperature related to the hex hatch as well, but I can tell you my personal experience has been just by one example. A cold front a few years back came through in late June. The air temperature went to 55 degrees at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. The water temperature was 55, but there was big Hexagenia mayflies hatching, not heavy, but occasionally, and just enough. And I caught trout in excess of 20 inches that afternoon on dry flies in a 55-degree day Hexagenia hatch. It's very common. And we talked a while back about, I did a video on a fly called the hairy drake, which is excellent for that hatch. I have a fly that, this is my opinion, I think that I improved on it a little bit. I think it's even a little better than the hairy drake for daytime hex fishing. And I call it the DT hex. DT stands for daytime. I'd like to show you how to tie that right now. So to tie my DT hex, the one we use in the daytime, I'm using a size 10 3X long hook. Now it's a couple sizes smaller than the big parachutes we use at night, but this works really well during the daytime. The 10 3X hook, and again tobacco brown thread. We're going to put the post on here first, so take the thread up to the post position. I use, again, my favorite white deer hair, just a little bit of that for a post. So we'll take a section of that. And we'll put on our post. Like this, just a couple of about 4 wraps there to hold it in place. Trim it close there, lift it up, stand it up with about 3 or 4 wraps there, and then we'll post it and make a nice pathway for the hackle to be wrapped on. And we're locked in with our post. Doesn't take much with deer hair. Now, taking the thread all the way back to the bend, I'm going to put on the tail, or actually it's going to comprise part of a trailing shuck. And what I like for that is dark Coq de Leon, dark Pardot. I love the barring on it, and it just makes a nice looking trailing shuck. So we'll take off a fairly healthy clump of that. You want at least the length of the shank if you can do that, and lock it in here. And maybe lift it up, give it one snug wrap behind so it's locked in there. And we have a rib of grizzly hackle. We're going to put that on now. There. And then the body I make out of, you can dub the body, but it's a lot faster to use poly on big flies like this. So I use a pale yellow poly, and we'll attach that behind the wing and run your thread all the way back to the bend so it's locked into place, and bring it back up to in front of the post. Of course, the body is very simple. It's just overhand wraps up to the post and then one wrap in front. And we'll tie that off. And when it's tied off there, you bring the thread just behind the post a couple of wraps, and we'll get rid of this excess. Now, this cocktail elm is making a part of our trailing shuck. We're going to finish that off with a little bit of deer hair overlay on that. And it's going to extend beyond the bend, and when we cinch it down you'll see what it does. Lock it in there all the way back and overhand wraps, and when you get to the bend just pull down a little bit. That flare completes your trailing shuck. From beneath, these fibers look like the thorax and the legs, the cast legs of the trailing shuck. Makes it highly effective that way. Back up here, and now rib with the grizzly. Several wraps of grizzly and one in front. And we'll get rid of that. And it's hackled with, I like grizzly and brown. You don't have to use that, but that's my favorite. I got a couple here pre-selected. So the difficulty with these big parachutes is sometimes finding hackle big enough to tie them on. We'll just get our feathers prepared like that and tie them in here in the front with a few wraps. And now we're ready. And I tie them both at once. And always wrap, when you're wrapping your parachutes, always put each wrap beneath the previous one. That way your hackle's not going to pop off the top. Stay in place. And whatever you want on there. I think I got 5 wraps of both hackles on there. That should be plenty. And to tie it off, simply lift it up and secure it. I'll get rid of the excess. And then to whip finish, we do the same thing. We'll lift it up and tie it off with your whip finisher like that. So that completes the DT hex. Now we're going to take it out and look at it, a nice close-up. When you look at it from underneath, you see this trailing shuck goes out to here, gives it the length, and these fibers on each side. It's like similar to what a Roberts Drake does, but it has a much more natural-looking shuck on it with that Coq de Leon, and then the Grizzly Palmer on it. I really believe helps just the grizzly, the black and white on it. I think it makes it give it a more lifelike look, because when these flies come up when they're hatching, they have a tendency to twitch and wiggle a little bit. I think it imitates that as well. And if not, I think it does a good job with the palmered hackle there, perhaps even of imitating a floating nymph. So tremendous fly, especially for daytime fishing. So I hope you get a chance to tie some of these. but I really hope you get a chance to use it. I think you're going to be very pleased with the results. So thank you very much for watching, and we'll see you the next time.